back to Exponential Finance, the podcast covering finance, technology and innovation, from our home in Japan and beyond. Today's episode is the second, brought to you in cooperation with the Mohammed Bin Rashid Initiative for Global Prosperity, featuring the winners of this year's Global Maker Challenge, innovators who are focused on solving the most severe sustainability issues of our time. First, let us introduce the challenge in the category Innovation for Peace and Justice. The world is currently seeing the highest levels of forced displacement on record. There are now almost 71 million people who have been forcibly displaced due to persecution, conflict, violence, or human rights violations, including nearly 26 million refugees, half of whom are under the age of 18. Worldwide, one person is forcibly displaced every 2 seconds. To ensure that this rapidly increasing number of people are able to lead healthy and productive lives for themselves, equitable access to services such as legal protection programs, healthcare, and education is key. Refugees and forcibly displaced populations face a host of challenges throughout their migratory journey. Many forcibly displaced people, especially those that leave their home countries entirely, have to navigate complex legal systems with limited access to legal assistance and representation. Millions of those forcibly displaced end up living in places containing poor water and sanitation infrastructure, and are subsequently vulnerable to significant health risks like communicable diseases and malnutrition. Further, of the 7.4 million school-age refugee children globally, more than half are not in school, with 63% enrolled in primary school, 24% in secondary school, and only 3% in higher education. Globally, 1 in every 108 people is either an asylum seeker, a refugee, or internally displaced. In our increasingly interconnected world, forced displacement cannot be treated as a short-term humanitarian issue, nor can it be addressed by just one country or sector. The Global Maker Challenge on Innovation for Peace and Justice aims to find and support innovative solutions that will connect refugees and forcibly displaced populations with enduring and effective legal, healthcare, and education services. To do so, the Mohammed Bin Rashid Initiative for Global Prosperity was seeking applications from innovators and makers around the world that will increase access to reliable and cost-effective legal support, reduce health risks among displaced populations through expanded access to healthcare and improved water and sanitation infrastructure that ensures safe delivery of drinking water and disposal of waste, reduce barriers to education and skills training for displaced youth. And now, please welcome Friedland Ran Sommer, the co-founders of Simbi Foundation, and winner of the Global Maker Challenge in the category Innovation for Peace and Justice.
Tell me about your organization and then about yourself, please.
My name is Friedland. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Simbi Foundation, which is a research-led nonprofit organization working to provide quality educational support to the next 3.5 million learners in remote and refugee communities around the world.
And my name is Ran Sommer. I'm the Director of Global Operations at Simbi Foundation, and I have the privilege of working with our partnered communities in both Uganda and India and in refugee settlements with the United Nations Refugee Settlement to enhance access to education and meet that goal of 3.5 million learners over the next 10 years.
Wonderful. So let's unpack that a bit. For me, there are two components. There's a little bit of an emphasis on the research-led part, and then there's, of course, the core component of the education, how you provide it. So how did this idea come about, and how did you combine these two aspects?
So the organization grew out of research. First and foremost, we are very much a research-based organization. Before it was called Simbi Foundation, it was actually called the Walking School Bus, which grew out of my master's research. And over a period of time, what we did was we refined our focus and our research and started doing more work in scaling the solutions that we thought and that we realized were creating massive positive impact, and starting to do less of interventions and solutions that were just not reaching the same goals and were not supporting people in the same way. Over, I guess, the last 4.5, 5 years, the organization has continuously had this research-based approach where we're continuously auditing, examining what is working well, what isn't, before we implement any new initiative. So for example, a Brightbox macro, before that actually goes into a community, it is heavily researched to understand what are the positive externalities, the positive unintended consequences, what are the negative unintended consequences, how can these be minimized? And so we really apply the scientific approach wherever possible. And as it relates to moving from research to an organization that has products and solutions, that's where Co-Founder Run comes in. And really, it's been quite a beautiful journey, both personally and for the organization, as we've progressed and transitioned from being a more research-dominant organization to an organization that are really scaling our solutions.
Yeah, essentially our goal is to consistently ensure we're providing value to the communities that we work with. I see our research as a sort of checks and balances for the organization to ensure that we're always on the same page with our communities. Every community we work with is unique, even if we're working in a similar region. There's a unique set of challenges that they will face. So ensuring that the way that we implement our interventions are very well ingrained with the values of the communities that we work with, within the capacity for them to implement and roll out, because essentially 99% of the year, they're the ones who are managing the project. So that's a really important area of validation for the organization to ensure that communities are feeling and promoting the value of the solutions that we co-create.
One other thing that I think is important to mention, when we think about a Brightbox or when we think about a product in general, there's a tendency to research it, to implement it, and then to have that check mark that says, this is done, let's keep going. And something that's quite unique about the research approach is that we're just continuously auditing and we are continuously optimizing. And so there is never a point in our mind where a solution is completely finalized. It is always in an iteration phase where it's continuously being validated and optimized. Just having that approach, which is where you remove ego and where you acknowledge we don't know, but we want to know, and we're excited to continue exploring and finding out, has been an approach that has served the organization as a whole very well, because it removes this bias and it removes these preconceived notions, and it ensures that you're just celebrating the communities and the research without thinking that some of the solutions that Ran and I sometimes have the opportunity to dream up solutions sitting in coffee shops in North America, and having the audacity to think that these ideas, when not fully informed by community members, are validated is dangerous.
So I want to come back to that, but before we do so, maybe we should explain to the listener what the product, what the Brightbox actually is.
The Brightbox is a digital resource hub that is trained to teachers on the ground on how to apply to the local national curriculum. So essentially, the Brightbox is a large shipping container classroom repurposed from a shipping container, fabricated so that it optimizes space for classroom learning, a massive roof that collects rainwater and also has a solar panels, which charges the classroom. We also strategically place the Brightbox in the grounds of a school campus so that it's able to connect to the surrounding classrooms, providing electricity and expanding the digital resource hub to the surrounding classrooms. The beautiful thing about the Brightbox is at the very back of the classroom is a closed off room separated from students that acts as a charging hub hotspot, which enables community members, local community members, to come to the Brightbox, charge their mobile devices at a relevant price point, which does a few really amazing things. First of all, it stimulates the local economy, which is a good thing. But on top of that, it provides an incentive structure for local communities to ensure maintenance of both the technology and the classroom itself, because it brings in a revenue stream that ensures that you're able to sustain the project without consistent input from external sources. So the revenue that's generated from the charging services both supports the maintenance of the classroom, pays solar administrators and administrators on the ground that are supporting the implementation, enactment of the program. And our projections show that over a 10-year period that we're able to generate enough revenue through these projects to also potentially fund an additional Brightboxes. That's the Brightbox classroom. And on top of that, we offer a Brightbox Micro, which is essentially the same offering, but in a much more compact solution. It comes in a case that we're able to put in all the devices that are relevant to the project, and also is well suited for schools that have existing infrastructure. And of course, comes at a lower price point, which is really helpful from a scaling standpoint.
That's amazing as a concept, because ultimately you're saying you just need to take care of the startup cost for the box. Once it's there, it's self-sustaining. That takes one headache away for sure.
The Brightbox Macro and Micro both work on top of cloud educational software that we've developed called Simbi Learn Cloud. And so all of our infrastructure essentially is powered by this digital learning platform, Simbi Learn Cloud, which works in remote areas and which actually creates its own Wi-Fi, a localized intranet, and then can be broadcasted 2.7 kilometers so that local community members don't need to pay monthly fees and don't need to have prior Wi-Fi or any network to be able to access a massive content library, everything from Khan Academy to Wikipedia and a hell of a lot more. So it's really a beautiful marriage of software and infrastructure working together to empower access to education.
From a content perspective, of course, there are things like Khan Academy that exist. Are you curating that and bringing it together in a way that makes more intuitive sense, or also you creating your own educational content?
Both. First of all, there's a ton of content that exists out there, like Khan Academy, for example, that is hyper relevant, but can be difficult to navigate. It's almost like there's a ton of content on YouTube and there's a ton of content on Google, but if you are an educator who has limited exposure to technology, it can be difficult to find and navigate this content. So one of the things that Simbi Learn Cloud does is finds and outsources hyper-relevant content, ensures that it's localized to the Ugandan national curriculum, for example, and then works to ensure that through the learning management system, that this content is provided and shown in a way that is intuitive and is easy to navigate, and most importantly, is easy to build a behavior of using the content. So the biggest issue that you'll see is not that people don't necessarily have access to quality content, it's that they don't know how to access it, and it's that they're not building a behavior of using it frequently. And so there's a lot of work currently being done and continuously being done to ensure that supporting lesson plans and supporting materials are added in a way that very quickly, once educators and communities are onboarded to the ecosystem, that they can quickly develop the behavior of using it and integrating it in the classroom so that we see that behavioral change take place. And the behavioral change that you're looking for is to start to see people adopting and utilizing these contents of the 21st century that they've previously not been able to access, and making sure that they're comfortable and confident in navigating it.
So when you're talking about habit changing, the things that come to mind are gamification or this concept of nudging people along. Is that what I should have in mind when you talk about this?
There's aspects of that. I wouldn't say that we are fully building out the nudging behavior yet to the extent that we want to, but we have started to, and we're excited to continue doing so. On Simbi Learn Cloud is a lot of content that we also create as an organization. And so one of the cool things that we do with Simbi Foundation, and that actually some of your listeners may be interested in, so we'll create locally relevant books. So books that are local to, let's say, the Ugandan context. And then we'll actually work with the UN to narrate those books on a partner technology called Simbi. So UN members can actually narrate these books. And after they have, then students in the refugee settlement can read and listen to fluent Ugandan accents or fluent South Sudanese narrators with locally relevant accents and locally relevant content. And so this has been a part of the content creation that we are very excited about as well.
The way technology cost goes, the major cost factor is actually the solar panels and then maybe the charging station. And so you're obviously riding a bit on the solar panel, the tech development curve, and that you face declining cost of that over the next 10 years. What's the startup cost to get the container, re-equip it, ship it to the location? What are you typically dealing with?
Prices fluctuates from country perspective as well as procurement practices. But in general, Brightbox Macro will cost about $45,000 US, which includes all the technology that's provided, all the solar, the shipping container, as well as access to all of the resources offered. And on top of that, of course, also connecting the surrounding classrooms. Yeah, that's the cost of the macro.
One of the things that's important to note is because of the ubiquitous nature of shipping containers and the fact that they're found and available globally, we'll source containers in the country that we are implementing. And so that has the effect of, one, supporting local economy, two, reducing tax and various other costs, and just makes it a hell of a lot easier to fabricate and move them around. The other thing that's beautiful about a macro or about a Brightbox is that the world is built to transport shipping containers. So whether you're doing installs in northern Indian villages in the Himalayan foothills, which we have, or whether you're doing installs in the Bidi Bidi refugee settlement, roads are optimized for transporting these. And so then it becomes a question of how much insulation do you want in the walls, whether it's a colder climate or a warmer climate. But ultimately, it's a solution that is globally applicable. And it's been pretty validating to see that as you watch it getting transported up a Himalayan mountain range.
So if I do the math, your goal is 3.5 million. One container is 60,000. So that gives me needed like 600 or so of these.
Exactly.
And how many have you deployed so far?
So in total, we've done 17 installs to date. Over the next 10 years, we aim to reach the 3.5 million over the next 10 years. We've got a pretty clear roadmap to make that happen.
If I hear what you're saying, 600 Brightboxes over the next 10 years is something that feels tangible. Ambitious, but still, I mean, it's a long way to go. How did you zero in to that segment? Did that also come out of the research? Because obviously you could have kept it much broader, but you've taken this specific segment. And how did you arrive at that?
Just two items I want to speak to. The first is when we think about, big ideas and pie in the skies and just a culture and an economy that celebrate moving quickly and breaking things and celebrate entrepreneurs who take ridiculous risk, often not thinking about the negative unintended consequences. And when we celebrate those people, we do create a dangerous environment of having people try to replicate that kind of behavior. When we think about the way that we operate and our goals, we need to raise to do what we want to do. We've got a target of $25 million to do that. And when we think about our diversified revenue streams to make that happen, when we think about the sustainable nature of the Brightboxes, when we consider a host of factors, we really do believe that it's a very realistic objective to actually see happen. And then in terms of honing in, this goes back to continuous research and validation and invalidation, and being able to look at everything that you're doing, being able to question what is creating the most value, what is our domain expertise, what are we able to do better than anyone else. So I'll just give you an example. Back when we were called the Walking School Bus, one of the other interventions that we were doing was we were building nutritional offerings because we wanted to help ensure that community members also had access to nutrition. So those were things like building chicken coops, water catchment systems, community-supported agricultural gardens. When we started to zero in on what we were doing really well, we realized we were doing the Brightboxes fantastically well. The agricultural initiatives that we were doing and nutrition initiatives were working well, but we were spread. And we realized if we just hone in and just do one thing and get hyper-focused, we can still partner with other organizations who bring that nutritional expertise that we want, but we don't have to do that. Having the ability to zero in and the clarity to just do less has ultimately made us build better products where we're considering things a hell of a lot more deeply than we otherwise would. And then that helped us arrive at the number of learners who currently do not have access to education in refugee settlements is 3.5 million. The Brightbox is very well optimized and well validated in the refugee settlement ecosystem. And based on our support and partnerships with communities and organizations like the UNHCR, we think it's an achievable number.
And on top of that, when you think about scaling an organization or scaling projects, one thing you have to take into consideration is maintenance. I think the beauty of the Brightbox, what gives us so much confidence in it, is its ability to create a self-sufficient mechanism that provides communities the ownership that they need to actually maintain the infrastructure and invest in it, and to report to us effectively and report to one another effectively to ensure that the project is continuously adding value. Our ability to identify that specific element of the Brightbox really ensures that we're able to continue scaling while having confidence in the maintenance of existing infrastructure.
I think when you look at a lot of founders and when you look at a lot of organizations, you'll often see, specifically in FinTech, it's like, oh no, we'll solve this with AI and we'll solve that with ML and we'll solve this with NLP. You've got a lot of vision and you don't always have as much integration. And so one of the really beautiful things actually about our relationship is that relationship between integration and vision and ensuring that there's a high level of alignment between the two. And it's definitely put us in good stead thus far. So we'll see where it takes it.
Because innovation really over the last 10 years, I would say at least, has moved from the center to the edge, right? And anybody can innovate and invent, which on the one hand is great, but it also has led to an environment, in my personal opinion, that we have an abundance of ideas and a lack of execution. You can have super great ideas, but if you can't make the rubber hit the road, then you're challenged. And it seems like your partnership addresses that in a very nice and effective way.
It does. The one thing that has been beautiful about building this organization in particular is once the rubber hits the road with whatever you're doing, whether it's building FinTech or whether it's building AI or literally whatever you're building, once you start, you're not always as introspective and you're not always thinking about the long-term impact and consequences of your work because you get so ingrained in what the day-to-day. And being part of an organization that is continuously thinking about the future of education and continuously thinking about improving access to education, it means that when you're in the shower, that's the kind of stuff that you're thinking about. And if we were building a company that was trying to gamify online poker, that's what we'd be thinking about. And the net positive impact of those thoughts would not really be positively impacting humanity. So it's kind of nice that by being a part of an organization that has this mission and vision, the unintended consequence is that the stuff that you just end up thinking about ends up having a net positive impact either way. So that's been a very nice learning along the way.
This feedback loop, regardless, I think, even for your model, is important because you have a 10-year horizon and lots of things can change within 10 years. When you talk to startups, you always have to think about competition as well. So in your case, I would say, for example, in India, with the new cheaper networks that Reliance Jio is putting out and making more affordable handsets and putting those in the hands of people who couldn't afford mobile phones before and getting electronic access, that to a certain extent makes the content that you're describing already accessible and maybe alleviates the need for having a physical box there. And these things can happen over 10 years. If you don't have the feedback loop, you keep running in a direction that maybe then at some point doesn't become as valid anymore. Is there anything you see as competition where you say, actually, we need to move away from this physical bright box concept? And that doesn't have, obviously not in the next 1 year, 2 years, but when you look over the 10-year horizon.
The short answer is that we want to see more competition in this space. We want to see a point that we are competing to put down these things because we have created an ecosystem where there are more companies and nonprofits incentivized to be building these type of solutions. We're excited about more competition in the space, and what it will do is it will make all of these organizations just more optimized, more recipient-centric, more customer-centric. So it's something that we really do look forward to. That said, the physical nature of the Brightbox has thus far stood the test of time in a few ways. Let's look at the Bidi refugee settlement and let's look at Twajiji primary school. When you think about delivering the type of technology and the type of solar and the type of infrastructure that is ultimately delivered, most of the time the infrastructure on the ground is made of brick and mortar. So it's actually quite difficult to protect or to safeguard this type of infrastructure in a weatherproof way against theft, against vandalism, etc. Also, if you rely on existing infrastructure, one of the things that can happen is that you're actually, one of your recipient communities can now become targeted and can become robbed or negatively impacted. So from that perspective, we do see the Brightbox from a safety perspective is quite necessary. Also from a transport of materials, quite necessary. A shipping container is really not expensive. And we're excited about also having more of our partner organizations just outright donating shipping containers, so that doesn't even become part of our COGS. There's definitely opportunities to change some of the way that the infrastructure works. As Run spoke to, we've also got a Brightbox Micro that can be applied in different settings. But for the next few years, I don't really see an event horizon taking place where there's a community that would not benefit from the full nature of the infrastructure. One of the big things that I see happening is, for example, when we think about what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink and the pervasive nature of where internet is moving, I see there being more opportunities for Brightboxes to be fully online, where a community could also have diversified revenue streams with internet cafes and additional components. So actually, what we discuss quite often is the Brightbox being essentially baseline infrastructure or foundational infrastructure that can support communities in building additional infrastructure on top of. So whether that's a charging station, whether that's providing power for a community, whatever that is, we see it actually being a cornerstone to build on top of. And so for that reason, I don't see the tech or infrastructure being obsolete.
Yeah, and also from a competition standpoint, refabricating a shipping container isn't a novel idea. This has happened many times before, and many organizations have even done it in a classroom context. When we look at those existing solutions, the competition, quote unquote, it's shocking to see the price point that they've created for many of these solutions. They're extremely expensive compared to our solution. And so if we're able to show that this concept is a relatively inexpensive intervention that creates quite a bit of impact for a quite high number of learners and community members, maybe this would promote the idea of utilizing and better using resources to enhance impact.
From a support perspective, how are you funded today? Who's supporting you financially to deploy more of these Brightboxes?
Yeah, we have a multi-tiered approach in terms of accessing funding for our different projects. First of all, we have an incredible team here in Vancouver that are constantly fundraising, either virtually or in the past in person. We have a really incredible team of grant writers who are constantly prospecting and pushing out grants. We recently were successful in the Mohammed Bin Rashid Initiative. We were able to secure enough funding for at least 2 more Brightboxes in the Bidi Bidi refugee settlement in 2021. That on top of reaching out to other foundations, other partnerships, working with the UNHCR and FinTech, the opportunities are essentially endless. We're quite confident, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be able to continue implementing. And with that kind of length of road, then we're confident we're going to be able to continue doing so.
We also work with corporates, so larger companies, for example, companies like the Royal Bank of Canada or Salesforce, who will have readathons where their employees are able to narrate books, which go into Brightboxes. And then we also work with them to see about how they may want to their employees' voices from just a digital global library into physical infrastructure by also donating Brightboxes. So there's a corporate path. And then I guess the one last thing I'll mention is we also, as an organization, launched a podcast called Impact in the 21st Century. We've also had sponsorships and opportunities come through there to continue building Brightboxes. And in a perfect world, in our little utopia, we would love to get to a point where we have the user base and the listening base and the sponsorship base that with each additional episode we crank out, we can put down an additional Brightbox. And so that's nothing that's going to happen in the next 2 years, but it's something that we're really excited to see.
Because it is a very reasonable approach that you're taking. If I look at the big tech firms focused also on technical literacy, which can be a building block on top of what you're doing, we have these challenges even in industrialized countries. So Japan is very short of technical talent, and Google here has taken upon themselves to set the goal of educating 10 million Japanese with basic programming skills. Maybe this is part of making yourself discoverable, and hopefully our conversation can contribute a bit to that. But if you look at it as an organization like Google and they give you $2 million a year to produce as many of these boxes and deploy them as possible, it feels like that would be a shortcut for all of this and have a real impact. And obviously they have the funding.
Yeah, if you don't mind reaching out to Google on our behalf, that would be awesome. One thing that I did just want to mention, though, and I think it's clear, but I just want to make sure that it is, as an organization, it's very easy to come on a podcast like this and to sound so confident that, yes, your solution works perfectly and everything's optimized and you're good to go. And the honest truth is that we are good to go and we're scaling and we're very confident in the solution, but we're continuing to optimize. And we definitely would beat out 3,400 other organizations because it is a well-validated solution, and because we have a track record of success, but there's still a long way to go. And if there was any listener thinking, oh, these guys just have it made and they know exactly what they're doing and they understand the entire market, that is not the case, and we're still learning. And I just want to make sure that that is crystal clear.
And that brings us back to the question I had at the beginning that I put on the shelf, some of the lessons learned. You mentioned some of that, where you said the nutrition component that you were experimenting with, that you dropped in this cycle of doing it research-led and then validating the research and adjusting. What were some of the other lessons learned where you had an opportunity to improve?
Absolutely. I'd say the example about education would be one that I'd give. So, for example, quite often we think that we understand the problem and we understand exactly the solution to fill that void. And so, for example, you could think, hey, everyone wants educational technologies of the 21st century. And the second that you provide them, that behavior is going to change. They're going to start utilizing them on a daily basis. You're going to see daily active usage, weekly active usage just skyrocket, and the intervention is going to be perfectly adopted. Then you provide that offering and you think, hey, why didn't that get adopted the same way that we thought it would? So what we've seen happen is we've seen an instance where we had made the technology available to a community, but it wasn't picked up as well as we thought it would be. Instead of saying, hey, the solution failed, we started to dig a little deeper. We started looking, well, why did it work well in this community? Oh, well, in this community, there were actually 3 technology educators who are more predisposed to technology and who really were the thought leaders who made sure that the tech was understood by the rest of the community and by the rest of the teachers. So what can we do to apply that approach to the model? How can we ensure that we're incentivizing other communities and other schools to be teaching their educators at the same rate before we actually do these installs? And so that actually led to a fundamental shift and change in how we provide Brightboxes. And one of the things that we do is that before a community receives any technology, any install, their teachers, a minimum threshold, have to go through our training process. And they have to lean in and they have to show us that they are committed to learning and working with us and adopting the tech. Because if you don't, it's just not going to be well utilized. And there are other communities who could better benefit. One other thing I'll share is a huge learning for us. School and community leadership is so important. One of the things that the UNHCR do so beautifully is how they vet who becomes a principal at a primary school. And so in the refugee settlements, what the UN will do is they have an entire steering committee that is focused on understanding who are the top performing principals. And if they're able to lead large teams of teachers and large teams of students, they will then actually move these principals to bigger new schools to make sure that they open successfully. For example, one of these principals is an incredible human named Boniface. He's the principal of Twajiji Primary School. One of our learnings early on was the most important thing that we can do well is ensure that the school's leadership is well aligned with our organization's mission, vision, and values. By ensuring that we get the partnership right at the beginning, we're essentially negating like 70% of the variability of success. Because when you have those strong partners, you'll find a way to make it work. And there were times in the past where we didn't have those learnings and those insights. And
so if you land with this 70% improved probability, it's essentially a classic land and expand strategy then. That first successful project in that geography, you can take some of the people to then spread out and have them found new locations, almost then like a franchise.
Absolutely.
That's exactly it.
You're hired.
Yeah. One really amazing element of our program is our teacher training model. And ultimately, the goal is to train teachers at a school. And one of the reasons why we're so confident in reaching that 3.5 million learner threshold is because of the proximity of these schools within a refugee settlement, and the community ship within these areas as well really allows for that teacher to teacher communication to take place and enables that scaling. So if we have a Brightbox in zone 1 of the Bidi Bidi refugee settlement, if we're planning to implement a Brightbox in zone 2, then teachers from those schools are able to train within Zone 1 from other teachers, get that direct knowledge from someone that they're familiar with and that isn't from the same community that they might be from potentially, and really have a much easier transfer of knowledge. And that's proven to really help us in the last 2 years as well from a scaling perspective.
Yeah, that was actually a good reality check for me because it's obviously an area I'm not intimately familiar with. And when I was thinking about geography, it was almost like from village to village. But the sad reality is that these refugee camps in parts hold millions of people. And so even penetrating and satisfying the potential demand in one of these camps takes certainly more than one of the Brightboxes.
It does. One of the things that has actually been quite beautiful to witness in the Bidi settlement and in many other Ugandan refugee settlements is the movement from semi-permanent to permanent refugee settlements. When we first started with this infrastructure in the refugee settlements, there was uncertainty there. And so there was a question of, in 10 years' time, if, let's say, the situation were to change in South Sudan, what would happen to this infrastructure? Where would it go? What would be done? But through this transition and through the certainty that the camps are permanent, what that means is that the infrastructure is not only supporting South Sudanese refugees, it's supporting Northern Ugandan learners as well. And so it's been really validating to us to see that shift in the UNHCR's perception of the camps and to ensure that regardless of the outcome, the infrastructure will continue to create this positive, lasting impact.
Super. A fantastic work, gentlemen. This is awesome. Anything that would want from our listeners, if anybody hears this and says, I want to contribute in a way, which can be financial, can be non-financial, how can people help you be more successful?
If your listeners are spending a lot of time listening to FinTech related podcasts, come check out our podcast. Most recent episode was with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and we've got incredible people like Alex Honnold and he's a famous rock climber and other remarkable humans. And if your listeners are making a lot of money through FinTech, we would highly encourage them to donate some of that money to build more Brightboxes.
Yeah, so feel free to visit us at simbifoundation.org and then check out what we do. We're very proud of what we do and how we do. And on top of that, interacting with our Simbi reading platform is definitely something to check out as well. So your narrations can help other people around the world to read. Definitely worthwhile checking out as well.
Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time. This is a fantastic project, and it becomes clear when you have the conversation why you won. So, as you said, beating out more than 3,000 other startups to be recognized, and hopefully that recognition through the MBR initiative also helps you get a bit more traction and funding. Super. Thanks a lot. It was a great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Norbert. It's such a pleasure.